3:47 a.m. Manhattan breathes in its half-sleep. Elevators humming, vents exhaling warm air. A light appears above the grid that doesn't belong to any sunrise. The city blinks once, and that blink becomes history. For a fraction of a moment, nothing makes sound, because sound is late to disasters. The brightness is too clean, too perfect. Like reality being written in apartments facing Midtown, curtains glow before anyone understands why. The flash arrives faster than meaning, and it doesn't feel like seeing. It feels like being exposed, like skin learning a new definition of heat. Every reflective surface becomes a second weapon pointed back at the streets. In Queens, a night shift nurse pauses at a dead intersection, irritated at the timing. In Midtown, a janitor grips a mop handle as the hallway turns white. On the river, dark water turns into a sheet of harsh glare. Somewhere far away, a duty officer watches a timer that has been rehearsed 1,000 times. He doesn't shout, because shouting wastes breath in rooms like this. He speaks in clipped phrases that sound calm and feel like collapse. The public doesn't get warnings that land in time. Phones stay in pockets, still trusted, still smug with battery icons. The city remains confident for a few heartbeats, and that confidence becomes its last luxury. At T plus 0.1 seconds, the thermal pulse rides outward at light speed. It is not fire yet, but it is already punishment. Exposed skin begins to sting like it's being sanded by invisible hands. At T plus 0.2 seconds, the skyline's glass faces turn into mirrors, aimed at human eyes. Side streets get hit by reflected brightness, like the blast is coming from everywhere. Bedrooms flash white through blinds that suddenly mean nothing. At T plus 0.3 seconds, cameras die while recording, their sensors drowning in white. Security feeds freeze on a single, impossible frame. Automatic doors open on dead power and never complete their cycle again. At T plus 0.5 seconds, heat finishes its first lesson on anyone outdoors. Clothing begins to smoke, then smolder, then ignite in patches. People don't scream yet, because the brain still thinks this is a mistake. At T plus 0.7 seconds, the electromagnetic pulse snaps across the region. Microchips stutter, then go quiet, like a million synapses erased at once. Traffic signals blink out together, as if coordinated by a cruel conductor. Elevators lock between floors and become steel coffins. Hospital monitors flicker, alarm once, then flatten into useless glow. The city's nervous system takes a hit it cannot explain, and it cannot heal fast enough. At T plus 1.0 second, the fireball expands into a sphere of violent light. Air becomes plasma, then becomes pressure, then becomes weather. The brightness shifts from surgical white into a hotter, uglier yellow. On the East River, the surface flashes, then wrinkles under sudden heat. Mist leaps upward and becomes steam that nobody asked for. Small boats turn into silhouettes that will not be found quickly. In subway tunnels, people feel nothing yet, and that mercy is temporary. They keep walking, annoyed by delays, shoulder-checking strangers. Their ignorance holds 4 seconds, like a breath held too long. 18 plus 1.5 seconds, the shockwave forms as a wall of overpressure. It is not wind. It is a moving boundary between before and after. The front edge is sharp enough to unzip buildings. Windows fail in sheets, then in sprays, then in glittering storms. Office paper erupts into the air like frightened birds. Glass becomes shrapnel traveling fast enough to turn rooms into meat grinders. At street level, cars shudder and lift, as if gravity forgets them. Asphalt flexes, dust resists, and the city's air turns into a moving curtain. Debris begins to fly, and flying debris becomes the dominant language. At T plus 2.0 seconds, sound finally arrives as a deep, crushing wah. It is not a boom. It is continuous tearing, rolling through avenues and between towers. The noise fills lungs, shakes teeth, and makes prayer feel small. Bridges tremble under forces they were never designed to negotiate with. Antennas whip and snap like grass in a hurricane. Rooftop units shear free and tumble as the skyline begins to shed pieces. At T plus 2.5 seconds, the fireball cools at its edges, shifting orange and dirty. That color change does not mean safety. It means the physics has reached its next stage. The rising column begins to punch upward, building the stem of the cloud. At T plus 3.0 seconds, hot air rockets up and starts pulling colder air inward. Streets become wind tunnels pointed toward the heat. Loose trash becomes airborne, and flames feed like predators discovering oxygen. Curtains that ignited now spread fire into living rooms. Office furniture begins to melt, then burn, then smoke with chemical breath. The first fires are small, but they are everywhere, and they are synchronized. At T plus 3.5 seconds, water mains rupture where ground shifts and pressure spikes. Hydrants geyser uselessly, spraying water into air that is already filled with ash. Sprinklers activate in buildings that are losing walls and losing time. The grid tries to protect itself by disconnecting, but automation is blind tonight. Relays trip, then fail, then lock into wrong positions. A cascade begins, and it doesn't stop at borough lines. At T plus 4.0 seconds, substations go dark in clusters. Transformers hum, then pop, then burn with oily flames. Night deepens in places not yet burning, and that darkness feels predatory. Emergency generators attempt to start, but some controllers are fried. Others start and run until fuel pumps fail or vents clog with smoke. The idea of backup power becomes a myth told by people who used to trust systems. At T plus 4.5 seconds, cell networks are not overloaded. They are wounded. Towers lose power, antennas bend, and switching centers go blind. Phones show bars that mean nothing, like confidence after betrayal. 1,000 hands lift devices into the air, begging for connection. Screens glow briefly, then dim, then die. People stare at their reflections and realize help is not coming through glass. At T plus 5.0 seconds, the subway becomes a trapped animal. Some tunnels go black, and blackness turns crowds into panicked bodies. Other tunnels spark and arc, igniting grease and trash into sudden flame. Trains brake hard, throwing passengers forward into strangers. Screams finally rise, not from the blast, but from the intimate fear of being buried alive. The old world ends in the tight space between shoulders. At T plus 5.5 seconds, the first 10 seconds are nearly finished, but the event isn't. Those seconds are only the signature, not the letter. Outside the immediate zone, silence becomes the loudest sound left. No engines hum because ignition systems fail, and roads are already choking. No sirens dominate yet because dispatch centers are dark. The city sits stunned, and stunned cities bleed. Now the trigger becomes visible through consequence. Somewhere a launch warning became confirmation, and confirmation became fate. Protocols unfolded with perfect grammar, even as humanity lost the plot. In hardened rooms, far from the coastline, people speak in acronyms and timers. They don't say millions. They say impact, corridor, and yield estimate. Language becomes a shield, and shields are thin. The information gap opens like a black ocean. New stations lose power, then lose transmitters, then lose their own sense of time. Social feeds become cemeteries of half-cent posts and frozen thumbnails. Rumors begin instantly because humans cannot tolerate empty space. A shaky clip appears, disappears, then reappears with different captions. Information at this moment is poison disguised as clarity. Denial arises first because denial buys seconds of comfort. People insist it must be a gas explosion, a plane, a transformer event. Nobody wants the word nuclear because that word rewrites the future. Then movement starts because fear has legs. Stairwells fill with bodies because elevators are dead. Streets jam with cars that can't be guided by lights, signs, or patience. Bridges become choke points where everyone tries to leave at once. Tunnels become traps where ventilation fails and smoke begins to crawl. The city's geometry turns against the people living inside it. The breakdown begins as procedure, not apocalypse theater. Gas pumps don't work without power and network verification. Card readers go blank and cash becomes suddenly sacred. ATMs become dead metal boxers that offer no mercy. Store doors lock when their systems fail, trapping supplies behind glass. People start bargaining, then pushing, then breaking. Hospitals become islands under siege within the first hour. Ambulances can navigate the jam, and radios scan the coordinate routes. Doctors triaged by flashlight, choosing who gets time and who gets silence. Firefighters arrive to hydrants with no pressure. Police arrive to intersections that have become riots of metal and panic. Every responder works inside a system that has already been punched through. Fires multiply and begin to merge like spilt oil igniting on water. Wind funnels down avenues toward the hot center, feeding flames like bellows. Smoke thickens into a living thing that crawls and climbs. People choke without seeing fire because the thread is now in the air. Eyes burn, throats seize, and lungs feel too small. The city starts to suffocate in public, in stairwells, in cars. The cloud above Manhattan rises with terrible eloquence. It is not a symbol yet. It is a machine converting buildings into particulate. The stem thickens as it draws in soot, concrete, dust, and vaporized metal. The cap spreads outward as it hits higher air layers. Ash begins to drift in patterns that look almost gentle. The sky becomes an active participant, not a backdrop. Then the invisible threat begins its quiet work. Fallout does not glow green, and it does not announce itself. It settles like dirty snow on cars, playgrounds, rooftops, and open mouths. No one can smell radiation, and no one can taste the danger. The body receives the dose in silence, and consequences arrive later on schedule. The delayed nature of it feels like betrayal. Families flee in every direction, guided by instinct and rumor. They do not know which way is safer, because maps don't show contamination. They drive until roads lock, then abandon cars like shed skin. On foot, crowds move with herd logic toward bridges and highways. They follow landmarks, and then a line that seems to lead away. Dust collects on shoulders and hair, and nobody stops to brush it off. The first official broadcast, when it finally exists somewhere, is fragmented. A surviving station transmits instructions with gaps and static. The message is simple and impossible. Shelter. Stay inside. Wait. But shelter is unevenly distributed across a city built for normal days. High-rises have basements, but basements have vents and smoke. Suburbs have space, but space is reachable only through clogged arteries. The new normal forms before anyone votes on it. People form lines for water at ruptured mains and open hydrants. Others form lines for rumors around a few working radios. Preparedness separates people quietly without permission. Those with flashlights, masks, and first aid kits become leaders by accident. Those with generators become targets by geography, sound, and smell. Night returns, not as darkness, but as absence of everything familiar. Without power, the skyline loses identity and becomes a jagged silhouette. Manhattan looks like a ruined monument to confidence. In that dark, new sounds become dominant. Footsteps echo in emptied lobbies, and glass crunches under shoes. Distant shouting rises, and the occasional gunshot follows, fired from fear. Official authority fractures into pockets that can still communicate. A precinct with a working generator becomes a fortress. A firehouse with fuel becomes a camp, and camps attract hunger. Across the region, command centers scramble for a map that still makes sense. They debate evacuation corridors, as if corridors can exist inside gridlock. They speak of zones, while zones dissolve into smoke. Zoom out, and the geopolitical response begins to harden. Leaders speak on hardened lines and satellite links, asking one question: was this a single strike, or the first page of a larger exchange? Alliances become theories tested by ash and silence. Article 5 becomes a phrase that weighs tons inside rooms with filtered air. Retaliation is weighed against annihilation, and the scale has no safe side. If more detonations occur elsewhere, the continent flickers like a failing bulb. Air traffic stops, then disappears from radar, then becomes irrelevant. Ports go silent, supply chains snap, and schedules become fairy tales. The economy does not crash like a graph dropping. It evaporates like water on the hot plate, leaving residue and arguing. Money still exists, but it cannot move, and movement was always its true power. Back in the city, the fragility of modern life becomes a brutal curriculum. Refrigerators warm, food spoils, medications degrade, and insulin becomes a countdown. The smallest conveniences reveal themselves as miracles of electricity and trust. Rationing begins informally, then violently. A case of water is guarded like treasure. A charged power bank becomes a bargaining chip worth more than jewelry. People try to document everything because proof feels like control. They write names, times, addresses, last seen places. Others burn photographs to cook food because memory lures us to hunger. Shelters filled with coughing, whispering, and the sound of people trying not to panic. Every rumor feels like a compass that might be broken. Chimney thickens, and minutes feel like hours. Days later, radiation sickness begins to separate the lucky from the unlucky. The first symptoms look like ordinary flu, and that makes them terrifying. Nausea, weakness, fever, then bruising that appears without impact. Hospitals cannot handle the surge, even if buildings still stand. Supplies run thin, staff collapse, and sterile procedures become impossible. The city becomes a triage zone without enough hands. In the aftermath, what remains is not a clean ruin. It is a living disaster, shifting with weather, fire, and human choices. The first 10 seconds purchased weeks of smoke and years of displacement. The lingering truth is simple, and it is cruel. Modern life is a thin skin stretched over chaos, held together by grids and agreements. When those fail, morality gets tested by hunger and cold. No happy ending arrives on schedule, because schedules died with the power. The city does not end with one final headline. It ends in thousands of small endings, one locked door at a time. And the final realization settles heavier than ash on a window ledge. In that first flash, the old world doesn't just break, it reveals what it always was: temporary, electric, and one decision away from silence. HP, Shahu, Mine Easy, Exact, Style Min Pori, 300-03200. Word Ski, Full-Length Script, Dubara Lake, Tunha, Paragraph 3 to 4 sentences. Toxingalain wala ishu na, ai, paspatadu. Full script yahin, chatmain, chahi, yafezas, kehisab, say parts main.